Imagine being crushed to death by rocks. Not just any rocks, but rocks that bear witness to your every gasp of breath. Each struggled to stay alive. Now imagine this wasn't a swift demise, but a drawn-out ordeal, a torment that stole your life over the course of several days. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, yet it's a chilling reality of history. In the heart of the Roman Empire, there existed a punishment more terrifying than any sword or spear. A punishment where the very ground beneath one's chest became the instrument of death. A fate worse than any gladiator could ever hope to die. This is the story of how men were crushed to death by stones in ancient Rome. Among the many forms of capital punishment employed by the Romans, one stands out as particularly brutal and terrifying. It was a method so effective that it left its victims slowly crushed into the cold, hard ground, quite literally turned into human mortars between unforgiving stones. This grim spectacle was not reserved for the most heinous criminals. It could befall anyone who crossed the wrong powerful person. From slaves and commoners to even members of the Praetorian Guard, the elite force tasked with protecting the very emperors whose favor or disfavor could determine one's fate. This was no hasty execution. The condemned would be meticulously prepared for what would be their final sleep. Their legs were bound together and a heavy stone slab would be placed on top of them, locking them into position. As the execution progressed, additional stones would be systematically piled on top of the slab, forming a kind of pyramid of death, each rock monolithically bearing down on the victim's chest, stealing away their breaths, crushing their bones, and extinguishing their life. This wasn't just about killing. It was about instilling fear into the hearts of all who witnessed this public spectacle. It was a lesson in obedience and a warning against any thought of rebellion. One's demise would be a public spectacle, drawing crowds of onlookers who would stand by morbidly fascinated as life slowly ebbed out of the trapped individual beneath the weight of the stones. There was no quick release from pain and suffering. Instead, as the stones relentlessly pressed down, the victim's chest would be slowly crushed, ribs and lungs alike. The air, once a source of life, would become a tormentor, each inhale becoming a monumental effort, each exhale a rasping plea for mercy. The process was designed to be as agonizing and humiliating as possible, and those who carried it out took great sadistic pleasure in the knowledge that there was no escape, no opportunity for redemption. The condemned wouldn't just die, they would be broken not only in body, but also in spirit. This was the brutal reality of a fate worse than death, a fate where one could be sentenced to a living hell right up until the moment they breathed their last. But why did Rome use this particular form of punishment? What was it about crushing a human being beneath stones that the Roman authorities found so appealing? Ancient Rome had its own methods of maintaining order and meting out justice. While many associate the empire with gladiators and chariots, its judicial system was equally fascinating and ruthless. The Romans used a variety of punishments, from exile and fines to corporal punishments, and, of course, the death penalty. But when it came to the death penalty, they weren't content with simple and quick methods like beheading or crucifixion. They wanted something that would not only take a life, but also send a message. Something that would deter others from even considering a similar fate. Enter the punishment we are discussing, the crushing death by stones. To understand the appeal of this form of punishment, we must delve into the psyche of the Roman elite, those who wielded power and enforced obedience. For them, the crushing punishment served multiple purposes. Firstly, it was a display of power, a demonstration of just how vulnerable a human life was in the face of their authority. If they could reduce a person to a crushed mass of flesh and bone, then surely no one was safe. Secondly, this punishment was meant to be humiliating. The victim was stripped of their dignity, their body broken and displayed for all to see. This wasn't just about physical pain, it was psychological torture as well. The Romans believed that crushing someone's body would also crush their spirit. Lastly, this form of punishment was a deterrent. The sight of a fellow citizen being mercilessly crushed could shake the populace back into obedience. It was a reminder not to question the authority, not to dream of rebellion, and certainly not to end up on the wrong side of the emperor's power. But who exactly faced this horrifying fate? Who were the individuals unfortunate enough to be chosen for this brutal punishment? To answer that question, we must look at the nature of crimes and rebellions that would incur such a terrible penalty. The Romans weren't shy about using this punishment across social classes. Slaves and commoners could find themselves trapped beneath stones if they committed serious crimes, or if their masters or the state decided they were expendable. Soldiers, too, were not exempt. The severity of their punishments often depended on the whim of their commanders or the suspicions of the military hierarchy, and it wasn't just disobedience or cowardice that could lead to a crushing death, but also expressing the wrong opinion or merely being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even within the emperor's family, no one was truly safe from this grim fate. Agrippina, the younger, the notorious mother of the Emperor Nero, met her demise in this manner, crushed by stones at the behest of her own son. Each of these cases illustrates how terrifyingly arbitrary this form of punishment could be. One could go from being an ordinary citizen, minding their daily life, to being selected for a horrifying and slow death by stones, without doing anything overtly criminal. This randomness made it all the more effective as a means of control. People lived in constant fear of incurring the displeasure of the powerful, and that fear was enough to keep them in line. However, despite its effectiveness, this form of capital punishment wasn't exclusively Roman. Other cultures, too, had similar practices. The ancient Greeks, for example, would use a practice called where the condemned was tied up and their throat was compressed, slowly suffocating them to death. In ancient China, the execution method included being buried alive, sometimes after having one's limbs chopped off. And in medieval Europe, the punishment of death by stoning was fairly common. The use of stones as weapons of capital punishment was widespread, demonstrating just how brutal and effective such methods were in striking terror into the hearts of populations. Still, there's something uniquely haunting about the Roman practice of crushing people with stones, perhaps because it combined the worst aspects of other methods. It took the gradual suffocation of the isolation and helplessness of burial alive, and the public humiliation and pain of stoning, squeezing them into a single horrifying punishment. The crushing punishment may have been one of the most terrifying forms of capital punishment in ancient Rome, but it was far from being the only one. Rome had a range of gruesome ways to take a life. Crucifixion, a punishment often associated with the empire, involved nailing someone to a cross, leaving them to die slowly from wounds and exposure. Fusarium, another brutal method, entailed the use of clubs to beat a person to death in the Roman Forum, the center of the city, ensuring a public and agonizing demise. And finally, the arginio, which saw the victim locked in a cage with wild animals, often to be torn apart or eaten alive. These were not gentle ways to leave this life, but each had its unique role in conveying the severity of the crime and the power of the Roman state. In the heart of the Roman Empire, power was a game played on a grand scale, where the lives of individuals were mere pawns. It was a world where loyalty was bought and sold, where ambition knew no bounds, and where the thirst for power often led to the most inhumane of acts. The crushing punishment was a tool wielded by those who held supreme power, a means to not just take life, but to terrify and subdue. It was a testament to the brutality of a time when might truly made right and where fear was the only language that resonated among the masses.